name is Eugene, or Gene Sampieri. My rank was sonar technician, SOG2. First started out with familiarity from my scoutmaster and a couple of uncles who were all in the Navy. The scoutmaster was in World War II in Korea, and the two uncles were both in World War II. The two uncles were both on the Canberra when it was torpedoed during World War II. Both were severely injured. One uncle was John Foster. He was on the Canberra when it was torpedoed. He was severely injured. Supposedly he was blown off the ship. He was more of a deck person and was blown off the ship, but a secondary explosion put him back on deck. But probably that secondary explosion is what really hurt him. He got out of 100% disability. He ended up opening a shoe repair shop down in Berlin, New Jersey. I didn't know him well. I did visit him a few times. It was kind of out of the way where he was. The shoe shop itself actually still stands. I just checked it this morning, as a matter of fact. And it's owned, of course, by someone else. He died in the 1990s sometime, along with my aunt at that time. She was the only member of my father's Italian family who married a non-Italian. My father had 7 sisters. He had 2 brothers, both we don't know a lot about because they moved to California and kind of lost track of them. They passed away, of course, and they are both buried down in Camden. So for some reason they were brought back, but we never really knew them, what happened to them out there. The other uncle was on my mother's side. His name was Arthur or Bud Farley. Okay, he was a radioman aboard the Canberra. He was injured also in that torpedo attack. He had about a 50% disability, which helped pay for his schooling when he got out. Became a radio and TV repair guy. I learned a lot from him. We used to go to his shop and sit and talk with him. He was an uncle that I was very close to. Okay, he passed away in the 90s also. He's buried down in Camden, New Jersey, as much as the family on both sides are. He was a radioman when he was aboard the Canberra, but he was not involved in the technical side of it. ETs took care of that kind of work. But he decided he kind of liked that idea, and that's what brought him into that, and he could get the training on the VA, which was totally paid for. Not a lot about the cruiser. I don't think he was aboard more than about 6 or 7 months when the torpedo occurred. I don't know what he did before that. He was only in the Navy about 2 years at the time. I did have another uncle, by the way, who was in World War II. Never left the continental limits of the United States. No one knows why. But as far as the uncles on the Canberra, that's about all I really know. He did talk about it a little bit, how leading up to the thing, he didn't think much about it. He was in a lot of gun battles and stuff. The other uncle never really talked about it at all. Like I said, we weren't close to him. And then afterwards, he would talk about how scary it was when he was injured. He was taken off the ship later on because the ship had to be towed back. Don't believe it was towed fantail first back because it was severely damaged. That's about all I know there. I do have a third uncle who was Korea. He's the one who was a medic, and he was involved in a battle that a lot of his platoon were injured, almost everyone, all but him and his helper on the medic side. They started pulling people off of this hill. They were and they were told to stop and get off of there. And he just kept going back and going back. He was later given the Silver Star for heroism. It pulled something, 13 people or something like that, off of the hill himself, along with his helper. Neither one of him or his helper were hurt. How that happened, no one knows. It turns out that hill was Pork Chop Hill. That uncle has never talked about his time in the Army. That was so bad. There was a story in the family. My mother used to have pizza parties. She was an Irishman who made really good pizza. She had a pizza party one day, and I was a Boy Scout, and my canteen was an Army canteen. You know, they were the best ones, better than the Boy Scout ones. And it was, for some reason, in this cabinet in the kitchen. And my mother asked him to get a pan out of the cabinet, and he saw this canteen, and he freaked out. And he disappeared down the street for a while. He had to go walk. He would never, to this day, he never talked about it. He just turned 93. So he is still alive. He still lives in a regular house. His wife is 90. I plan to try to get down and see him in a couple of weeks. So, a lot of the guys I was in high school with, and I graduated in 1958, were getting drafted. In 1958, we were starting to hear a little bit about Vietnam. We weren't really involved at that point, but the draft was in effect, and people were being drafted, and there wasn't a lottery system at the time. I figured, my time is coming. I want something in electronics. I'm not going to get that in the Army, most likely. If I get drafted, I'm definitely not going to do that. And because if I had gotten the job at Camden Shipyard, I might have been deferred, okay? But I didn't get that. I didn't get what I wanted, at least. And in January, I decided to go see the recruiter, and I was there a couple times, and I said, I need something in electronics. I said, nothing else. I said, I don't want to be an electrician. That was my original intention when I was a kid, was to be an electrician. I don't want to be an electrician. I want something in electronics. I don't care what. I wanted ET is what I wanted. So they said, okay, we'll see what we can do. They sent me over to Philadelphia. Took a series of tests. Now, in high school, I had mentioned I had taken a radio and TV electronics course, correspondence course. And I had just finished that up when I graduated from high school. I wasn't really ready to go after that kind of a job just yet, but I had just finished that up. And that really helped when I went over to take those tests. And I got very high grades on them. So when I went back to the recruiter, he says, this is what we can get you something in electronics. And they gave me a date of February 4th. So I said, okay, sign me up. And that was all. I told my father and my mother that I was looking into this. And they said, okay. And when it came the day that I was to report to the local station in Woodbury, New Jersey, my father says, you want me to walk you down there? And I said, I prefer that you don't. We got along great, but I said, I just prefer that you don't. I said, I don't want to cry, and I don't want you to cry. He says, okay, I understand that. He was an old-time Italian type of guy, so. So I walked on down to the station. A bunch of other guys, we were taken by a minibus over to Philadelphia, where we were sworn in, put on a plane, and sent to Chicago. We flew into Detroit, hopscotch over to Chicago O'Hare, and then took a bus on up to Great Lakes and reported at around midnight, as is often the common thing for reporting to Great Lakes. And they said, get some sleep, you're going to be woke up at 5:30. And at 5:30, the old soda bottle in the trash can. So I entered the Navy in February 4th of 1959 and went to boot camp at Great Lakes. Great Lakes, it was interesting. It was cold. It was not difficult by some people's standards. I kind of lucked out a little bit. When we first went in, I was just a regular boot. We had a brigade mailman who was part of our company, and after 4 or 5 days he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. They asked if anybody had any post office experience. He was the brigade mailman. I said, well, I delivered mail during my junior and senior years at Christmas time. They said, okay, you're the brigade mailman. That made my boot camp easier because I always had to be around and pick up the mail, distribute it to the various companies in the brigade, and then distribute it to my own people. So that kind of made it fun. And getting through boot camp really wasn't all that difficult. I was not unused to being away from home. I didn't feel loneliness or anything like a lot of guys. In Great Lakes, you normally would be given an I think they were M1s or M2s, non-operable rifle. So the third day in, after you formed, you got your rifle. The fourth day, they took them away from us. They said, we're going to do something different for the winter. And they had companies be doing calisthenics in what's the word I'm looking for? Precision, not calisthenics, instead of that. So that was pretty interesting. That was much better than high school calisthenics. You learn very quickly to keep in step. It's the same as if you were marching, keep in step. You learn to march. You learn the gruffness of your company commander. We had he was about a 20-year guy, was a ship fitter, first class, petty officer. Tough, but fair. He wasn't one of the nasty guys. He learned everybody's name very quickly, last name only. I had to go to him early on because I had accidentally kept my high school ring. It was in my pocket, I didn't realize it. I went to him, I said, Mr. Oliver, I have something that I forgot to send home. And I presented him with my ring. He says, thank you, it's mine now. All right, my fault. We went on through boot camp. Like I said, I was the brigade mailman, so that made a lot of stuff easier. Our company decided to boycott chow all the time because the food was not very good. We paid for that, a lot of extra marching. But we caught up pretty quickly after that. We had only a few dropouts due to either illness or cleanliness problems, that kind of thing. Maybe one guy was nasty, he was just wouldn't take orders. I think we graduated out of the 88, we still graduated over 80. We had 88 people in Company 88, which was kind of interesting. Most of the companies were that size. I don't remember how many companies were in the brigade, at least 6, maybe 8. So my job as mailman was, every day, was a little busy. Come service week, I was supposed to be in materiel. I went to Mr. Oliver and I said, that's going to be a problem with my mailman job. He said, oh, that's right. You're going to be a master at arms, which really meant nothing. You had to wear the arm sleeve, right? You went around and you make sure the radio was still there every day, and you checked a couple other things in all the barracks that you were responsible for. So that's what I did for service week. After that, the normal training, we did the gas building thing. That was maybe the worst part of all of it. I thought I was going to get really sick on that. I was able to hold it back. We learned a lot of knot tying. It turns out I already knew just about every knot that they were teaching, and I ended up, as they broke it up into smaller groups, I ended up teaching a group of about 7 or 8 guys. So I was a petty officer. You wore this little crow on your right side. That kind of made things a little easier too. We did shoot carbines. We did not shoot .45s in boot camp. We did shoot carbines. I had shot them before, so I was able to hit a target. I was not able to hit a bullseye, but I was able to hit a target. Swimming was, I learned to swim late. I was maybe 12, 13 before I learned to swim, but I didn't really have any problem with the swimming or the floating exercises that you had to do, like jumping in with your pants, that kind of thing. I didn't have any problem with that. When I went into boot camp, I only weighed 125 pounds. I weighed 135 when I came out, which was a good thing, actually. I fit into the clothes that were very loose at first. What else did we learn? Like I said, we did a lot of the calisthenics and everything. We were not an honor company at any time, for varying reasons, I guess. The RCPO crew was pretty good. How they picked them, I'm not sure. They were all big, all tall type people. I was probably the shortest of the POs. I was only 5'8", and I know this. The RCPO was 6'1". The guy who was supposed to be the mailman was 6'2", but with his TB, he was set back about a month. Graduation was April, and was outdoors on the main. It went very well for everybody. When it was all done, you went back to your barracks, and CPO, the company commander, came in, shook everybody's hand, went on down the list, around to the bunks as everybody's packing up and getting ready to leave. And he comes up to me, and by that time I've known him as Sam instead of my last name, and he puts his hand out and shakes my hand, and then it was my rig. He just smiled. He says, "Have a good one." So he remembered to give it back. Like I said, he was not a nasty person. He was very fair. I talked to some others who had CPO or company commanders who were not nice. And you hear a lot of horror stories today of how bad it was. But I did not think boot camp was hard. It was tough. You learned a lot. You kept your nose clean. You did what you had to do. You obeyed orders. You passed your courses. You got through with flying colors. You didn't have a problem. We graduated boot camp sometime in April of '59, and I was selected to go to sonar school in Key West, Florida. I was on leave at home in South Jersey. I went from Philadelphia down to Miami in, what time is this? It's late April. To Miami, and then a puddle jumper down to Key West. And we were picked up by a Navy bus to go to the base. And I just saw a picture of where the base used to be, or the gates to the base used to be. There's now all houses. The base is gone, for the most part. But went into the base and put it into the old barracks. There were new barracks going up. They were ready, almost ready. So they put us into these old barracks, and then the next day they said, "Oh, you're going to be reassigned as a sort of runner, clerk, get coffee in the offices. That'll be your duty for several weeks. Your class doesn't start until May, sometime in May." So my duty was to report to this office every morning after chow and see what my duties were. I would be running messages between offices, or running messages to other buildings, running maybe to the store to get some coffee, the grounds and stuff, make the coffee, all that kind of stuff. Sit, do a little bit of typing if they needed a little bit of help. I didn't know how to type, 2 fingers only. I'm better today. Come around the beginning of May, second week of May maybe, my class started. At that time, the new barracks opened. The new barracks were at the other end of the base, on the beach. We had our own private beach, our own swimming area, which was roped off, and the barracks were 3-story, I do believe. Each barrack room had 4 twin beds in it and 4 wooden lockers. really nice lockers. Totally different from what you had in the old barracks, which were old metal pieces of crap, really. So at that point, school started, and now it was up to you to get through school. The classes started in basic electricity. You went through 6 weeks of that. And if you passed that with a certain grade point, I think the grade point was 2.8 or something like that. I got through electricity at about a 3.8 or 3.9. You went on the 6 weeks of a basic electronics. You had to pass that before you ever got to sonar school. If you failed out of basic electronics, you were offered oceanography. I didn't understand what that was. Turned out it was top secret work. But I passed my basic electronics with a fairly high average, like 3.8, and went on to regular sonar school where you started learning the equipment, the maintenance of the equipment, the operation of the equipment, and the sonar operations itself. That went on for the next 12 weeks. The total is 24 weeks, or 6 months essentially. Maybe it amounted to really 25, 26 weeks. Near the last 2 weeks or so, there was a sea phase where you went out on a destroyer escort for a week. I thought that was going to be my downfall when I got on that. The first day I was in the sonar shack, I did my work on the stack, operating sonar, on a contact, doing all the right stuff, and planning, and then working a fathometer. And I got sick all over the fathometer. It just came up so fast that they said, okay, you passed everything. You could be in the fantail the rest of the week, but I had to clean up my mess first. So I spent the rest of the week on the fantail, helping out with different things back there. Not a lot of work, but 4 days of basically nothing. And then you went back in for the last couple of weeks, and you started your final examinations. At that time, sonar had started, probably around 1955, of doing their own electronics work, doing their own maintenance and everything. So that filled the promise from the recruiters to get me something in electronics. And I spent over 7 months down in Key West, Florida. First few weeks as a runner and a clerk. But once school started, it was all learning. Plus a lot of fishing and scuba diving and that kind of stuff. It was kind of almost a 7-month vacation before the real job of the Navy started. And then graduation. Upon graduation, you got your orders to where you're going. My next ship was the USS McGowan, which is a Fletcher class. I flew out of Key West to Miami to Philadelphia, back home to South Jersey, spent 7 days there, and then I had a plane to Providence. I should have taken a bus, it was quicker. But I could plane to Providence and a bus on down to Newport. At Newport, I had to pick up another bus into the base and reported aboard the McGowan. And that's when my real career started. Reported to Newport on the McGowan mid-November of 1959. The McGowan was a Fletcher-class sub. It was heavily involved in World War II. I learned a lot about a lot of the sailors aboard who knew the history, so I learned a lot about the ship. I had to walk probably halfway down Pier 1 and cross 2 other ships to get to the McGowan. So of course you had to do the permission to cross on every one of them. Came aboard the McGowan, you really couldn't see it as much. The 2 that I had to cross were not Fletcher class. They had a closed quarterdeck area. The Fletcher has an open quarterdeck. So I couldn't really get a good look at it until I got across to it. A dual stacker with an open quarterdeck, which was kind of interesting. It didn't seem all that big to me. it turned out one of the guys on watch, there was an officer of the watch, petty officer of the watch, and a runner. And he turned out to be a sonarman apprentice, seaman apprentice sonarman. So he took me right on down to where I was going and got me straight with the locker, and then took me back up to ship's office to get my orders in and everything. They had looked at them when I came aboard, and the officer of the deck had looked at them. And he says, okay, he says, we'll get you squared away downstairs, and then you're going up to the office. What was kind of interesting was when I went down to the quarters, how small and how everybody was so tight in, and how much locker space you had. It was even smaller than boot camp, I thought. We didn't go out the next day. I think I was aboard 2 days before we finally went out, and I started having my seasickness problems after we got out. I was quickly on they got me trained on the fathometer very, very fast. The first day that we went out, I was on a fathometer watching. I wasn't actually doing the work. 3 trips out before I was actually the fathometer operator. They gave me a tour of the sonar spaces. There's the sonar up behind CREC, or actually behind the bridge. Much smaller than, say, on the Purvis when I got there, but a very tiny place. The fathometer itself was right behind the bridge, the hatch leading into the bridge, so officer deck could hear you directly. The other sonar spaces with all the equipment, the actual main equipment, which would be the transmitters and stuff, actually open to anybody walking by. They were not in a room by themselves. They were off of the mess decks. And then the rest of that was in a small compartment. Various pieces of, there's a number of pieces of equipment that are involved in the sonar. Once we were out, I started getting some time on the sonar stat and learning how to really operate it in real weather. Of course, I was having problems with getting seasick all the time, and of course the sailors on board knew it, and it seemed like they were always serving pork chops and hot dogs at lunchtime. Stuff that was, pork chops were always greasy, and hot dogs never looked good. So that was an introduction into real Navy life. You don't have real Navy life until you get aboard a ship. I started learning a little bit. We didn't have anybody aboard at that time who was aboard during World War II. But we had some guys aboard. We had a chief who knew the history. He was an old-time chief too. The chief and the first class had no electronics. One second class had some electronics, not a lot. The chief would sit and talk about some of the history, and the real history starts during World War II, and during the Battle of Leyte Gulf is where the history that I pick up on the McGowan. I had done a website for the McGowan reunion organization for them. I said, I'll do a website, sans dues, I'll pay for the website, which wasn't much. It was just a basic site. And I learned all about the Sorrego Straits and the Battle of Leyte Gulf and what their work was in there, and how much they were involved in the battle itself, in the sinking of the Japanese battleships, and the number of torpedo runs that they were on. And then after that, I didn't get a lot of history until the end of the war. The McGowan was involved in transporting Japanese officers to the signing in Tokyo Bay. So I had some pictures of that. Somebody had donated. I don't know if I still have them or not. I'll send them to you. And that's about what I learned about that time. They were, after World War II, they were decommissioned, and I think in '46. They were recommissioned for Korea, and then they were talking about decommissioning it after Korea. Then they changed their mind and they kept it going until the transfer to Spain in 1960. McGowan at first wasn't a lot of fun because we were doing daily exercises out of Newport. And my stomach wasn't handling it very well. So every time we go out, I get sick. This went on for a couple of weeks until we went down the east seaboard to below Cape Hatteras. And then on the return trip through Cape Hatteras, the weather was so bad that they had to rig a one level so that you could use it to cross the torpedo deck to get from where you were going from after berthing. You were not allowed on the main deck. I got over my seasickness really quick and was never bothered again. So on the McGowan, I moved on up to third-class petty officer. Just before that, I was on mess duty, and we were going out on a daily exercise. We were going out of Newport Harbor, and we had to change course for the ferry that runs between the island and Middletown. For some reason, the course change was not given to go back to the original course, and we ran aground in front of Fort Adams. I was holding a tray of sausages for the steam line, and I watched it happen. Went down the ladder, put on my sausages on it, went to my general quarters. Normally I was on the fathometer, and I'm glad I wasn't that day. So it took them all day to get us off. It did a lot of damage to the ship. We had to go up to Boston to get dry dock. And the commanding officer, Captain Martin, because he was the captain, he wasn't himself really at fault. The navigator who was a full lieutenant, was on the bridge. Both the captain and the navigator, lieutenant, were removed. The captain was sent to Point Mugu in California, which is an end of career place. And I think the lieutenant was sent someplace up in central United States north, cold weather. Don't know what happened to him after that. That was pretty much mandatory that they were going to be the ones taking the blame. Sometime later, we were involved in after I made third, we were involved in a blimp crash in the Atlantic that we were involved as a rescue ship there. And several other things, and then we were ordered to take a North Atlantic cruise, special exercise, up into we left in sometime around August of 1960, and went on up into the North Atlantic, got my royal order to the Blue Nose of crossing the Arctic Circle. We were on a NATO exercise, which involved working with other navies, and went up into the North Atlantic, and we crossed over the Arctic Circle by some 50 miles or so, which qualifies you. And then we came on back down around and doing the rest of our exercises, and then captain came online and says, for all of you who we're not going to have a ceremony because of our exercises, but you're now, who haven't been there before, are now members of the Royal Order of the Blue Nose. And we are card-carrying members. And that was as simple as that. In some cases, they do go through a ceremony, not as bad as the one of crossing the equator. I know people who've been through that equator one. I'm glad I didn't cross the equator. We went on down and we stopped in Portugal for a while and then into the Med. We were just on a sightseeing tour at that point, where, the normal presentation of the ship in various ports. We started out in Port of Portugal, which is one of my favorites. It's just a really nice hilly town. Some really good restaurants. My thing when I was on Liberty in foreign ports was to find good restaurants, eat where the people eat, see what's there, not looking for other stuff. So we spent several days in Newport. I got over on Liberty twice there. Had another guy and I decided to have a meal in a fancy hotel restaurant. I think it cost us all $4 a piece, which was a lot of money for a filet mignon. From there, we went on into the Med. We stopped at the fueling port, Rota, Spain, I think it's called, and then on into the Med. And our first stop in the Med was Naples. We were there a few days. We went out on some exercises and back to Naples, and then it was announced we're going to the Red Sea. We were no more than an hour outside of Suez when we were told to turn back. And that's when we went back to Naples and did the 6-week repair readiness of the Magellan for transfer to Spain. That was next to the Acadia and was a lot of work for everybody. You were working 12 to 16 hours a day. You did get some liberty time. Like I said, my first 4 weeks was just strictly on the equipment. I was not lead PO or anything, the second class didn't feel comfortable with it. What was funny is that he was one of those who was retained on the ship after the transfer to help the sailors, the Spanish sonoran. But that was only in operations. Okay. I think their ETs were actually going to be the ones to handle the equipment. So I spent a lot of time going over the equipment over the first 4 weeks, and then did a lot of chipping and painting after that to get the ship ready for Barcelona. We went into Barcelona late November, last day in November. On December 1st, the Magellan was transferred to Spain. First of all, the ship had to be spick and span. All of the spaces, there better not be a bit of rust anywhere. A lot of over-the-side work was being done. Some help was brought in from outside to help handle that. All of the electronic spaces were manned by technicians. Myself and one other, I would pick a different guy each day. And the sonar, we would go over every piece of the sonar equipment to make sure everything was calibrated properly. We had to repair 1 or 2 transmitter circuits, which were the big high voltage circuits, had to be rebuilt. Calibration was done every day for that 4 weeks that we worked on it to make sure it was ready. The 2 days before at the end of the 4 weeks, I went on to help chipping and painting, working on the hedgehog mounts and stuff like that. Cleaning the spaces, the sonar shack, which was a large space compared to Magellan. We would make sure everything, all the paperwork and everything that they needed was all there. Everything was still in English, that would be changed later on. But the last few days, we went back over the sonar equipment one last time to make sure everything was absolutely perfect. And then we finally left Naples and headed for Barcelona. And of course we went through a big storm. The ship got kind of messed up a little bit, so there was a lot of work on that day before we pulled into port to clean everything again, make sure there wasn't something that was hidden before that suddenly popped up. Make sure sonar was working very properly on my part. Pulled in on the last day of November. Everybody packed up their bags, and December 1st was the last day for the ship. That was the Magellan. I do have pictures of you. It shows us coming off, sea bags over your shoulder. It shows I have pictures of the transfer of command over to the Spanish. We all walked off and then assembled on the pier for the final ceremony, and then we headed to wherever we were going. Some were going to the Acadia back, some were transferred before we left Naples to the Acadia. Radioman I knew fairly well, was going to the Acadia, and that was his new duty station. So he was staying in Naples for a while. I think the Acadia was there for another 6 months. Others were going to ships like the Decatur, who were in port at the time. A couple of other destroyers. The McNair, I think, was there. The Essex was there. Huge! Even though it was the Essex, one of the smaller ships, right? But it was huge. And just trying to get around, we want to know where our bunks were, where's the mess decks, and where were the movies. And once you got the lay of it, it wasn't too bad. You just had to stay off of the flight deck, and you had to stay out of the hangar deck. You couldn't go in there at all. But other areas you could go. It was uneventful. It really, we had nothing to do. It was boring to some extent. But the food was good. And there was always food. You want to go get something to eat? You would have got something to eat. Didn't matter what time it was. There was always something to eat on board a carrier. And that's the same thing I hear today. And of course the carriers are much bigger, except for these small, like the Iwo Jima is a helicopter carrier. And even then they said the food on board the Iwo Jima is great. I went to the Essex for transfer back to the United States. Okay. Aboard the Essex, we were told to keep out of the way. That was it. I said, you can go up, you can't go on the flight deck, but you can go up into the tower a little bit. There was one area you could go out and look. But if we were in an exercise, then you go to your racks. Just stay there. There were about, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 of us from the McGowan. Didn't get to see much. When they were doing exercises, you were not allowed out there. So you really didn't get to see much. You weren't, even on that one observation area, we were allowed to go at certain times. We were not allowed up there. So that was a little disappointing. I would like to have seen more of that, but I see it in the movies. Oh, Essex was much better. First, they have much better, bigger spaces to store more fresh stuff. McGowan, after a while, if you're out to sea too long, then you're getting to the powdered stuff and the cans, more of the canned stuff. Food wasn't bad aboard the McGowan. It was just, maybe the worst was when they had to switch to powdered eggs. Okay. I never had, outside of a little bit of boot camp, I never really had a complaint about any of the food. And on both ships, a lot of times on board Sunday import steak and eggs. It was always great. Brunch. That was a quiet trip back, though it took several weeks. The Essex did do a stop in Gibraltar, so we got to see Gibraltar before we headed on back. We hit a storm on the way back too. Yeah. It was a nor'easter type thing. It handled it much better than the McGowan or the Purvis. I've been in nor'easters on both of them. And I reported back to Newport, went on leave and came back after New Year's, January 2nd of '61. Reported on the Hugh Purvis, which became my final ship. That one was a little easier because it was right next to the dock. Bigger than McGowan, a bit longer. Closed quarterdeck. Made things like when it was a inner ship in a string and you had to cross it, was a little harder. Sometimes they would let you go through the hatch, sometimes they make you walk all the way around. Bit bigger, cleaner. It was cleaner than the McGowan when I first went aboard. Okay. The officer of the deck was not there when I went aboard. The petty officer of the watch and the whatever they call the seaman of the watch, just as a runner, was there. The officer of the deck finally popped out. Turned out that he was a full lieutenant who turned out to be, you didn't want to cross him. I got to know him later on in the Purvis organization. Very tough, fair, but if you crossed him, that type of guy. He was an Annapolis grad too, by the way. When I reported aboard, they said, "Where have you been?" I said, "We were just in the Med transferring to McGowan to Spain." They said, "Well, guess where we're going in March?" In March, we took off for a full 7-month cruise in the Med, and we hit a lot of places over there, including that 6-week tour of the Red Sea. We were in places like France, and, multiple places in Italy, Sardinia, Sicily. We were in Malta. We were in Greece, Turkey, Lebanon, of all places, and then the Red Sea and Djibouti and Yemen, Karachi, Pakistan, Bahrain, places like that. Some of them were fun, some of them were not. All were interesting. It was really a great time. The trip through the canal was pretty easy. We went, it was just straight through. We didn't have to stop and wait for anybody because there are some narrow spots. We went on through, and that's when we started hitting the temperatures 100 degrees on deck. At nighttime, it was still 80, 90 degrees, and we did not have air-conditioned sleeping spaces. The only air-conditioned spaces aboard were the electronic equipment spaces, CIC, radio shack, and the sonar shack. And the sonar equipment spaces were all air-conditioned, and the officers' quarters. Okay. We slept either on deck, literally, under a gun mount, up on the O1 level, or sonar, being a fairly large space, we'd usually have 5 or 6 people sleeping on the deck in the sonar shack as we were air-conditioned. And that would get the temperature up in there a little bit, but it still was, 80 degrees was a lot better than outside at 90. Say at midnight, it would be 90, 95, 100 degrees. It's just tons of sand and like mountains that you could see from both sides at various ports. Some spots you'd see greenery, which was a little bit surprising, but I guess they were more like an oasis. Those that were down towards the shore, especially in the narrow part, where sometimes you had to wait, you would see a lot more greenery there. You'd see a little bit around Alexandria as you're coming down. And I thought we were going to stop there, and what's it called, Port Suez or Alexandria. They decided not to. So did that all the way through. Djibouti was our first stop. Not a lot. I did go on Liberty there. Didn't stay long. By the time you walked, you got a shower and got your whites on, and you walked off the gangplank, you were already wet. Even though you were in a desert country, on the shoreline, it was humid, very, very humid. And the temperature didn't help at all. So maybe I didn't stay on Liberty more than an hour or two and went back. We were only there for 3 days, so there was only 2 days of Liberty. Turkey. Of course, Turkey is entered from basically the Med, on up through the Dardanelles, which was really weird because you get to that really narrow spot. You look at both sides, and there's people there, right? We were going into Istanbul. I really liked Istanbul. The only day I didn't like it, we were there for, 5, 6 days. So we got 1 or 2 days Liberty, but I also had shore patrol there. One of the things that we were told about the Turks is they're very inquisitive. If they see somebody standing too long, especially if it's a foreigner, especially if it's a sailor, they're going to gather a crowd. So if you're on shore patrol and you saw a sailor standing too long in a store window, you would move him along. You said, "You can't do this, otherwise you're going to draw a crowd." And you start drawing a crowd, we'd move him along. That was a little bit on the scary side because you didn't want something to happen. You might now be in the middle of it, and there's only two of you. And you got the best you have is a baton, right? Istanbul itself, I really liked. Restaurants, found good restaurants, found restaurants that the people ate at, which was my favorite thing to do. All the different things to go and see, just phenomenal. I just wish I had my pictures. I've lost a lot of my pictures. I got one full day's liberty and a half day liberty while in Istanbul, besides the shore patrol. I had a lot of fun with that. We didn't have any problems. Some ships have had problems in there. Some sailors have got themselves in trouble. It's not hard to do. Too many sailors don't know when to stop drinking. I hated getting drunk. I would have maybe a drink. I'd maybe have a beer, not more. Even at a party. That's what I remember about Istanbul. It's just a pretty city, really. The cathedrals, just really nice. People were friendly, sometimes overly friendly. Pakistan, we were in Karachi. I guess the one thing I mainly remember about Karachi, decided to go on liberty. I did not have shore patrol there, thank God. But went to the Karachi Zoo. It was a picture that I'm looking for of being another guy had gone to the zoo. It was kind of fun. Right? It was dirty. The city itself was fairly dirty. People, some were friendly, there were a lot of not friendly. A lot of people would ignore you. We didn't have any trouble. None of the McGowan, or none of the Purvis people there that I know of had any trouble. Nobody brought back by the Master at Arms or the shore patrol that were on shore there. We were there for a couple of days, hot as usual. I've known since then people from Pakistan. A guy I worked for at Bell Labs, wife's family was part of the group that had this cross march between Pakistan and India. His wife's family was one of those leaving Pakistan. Described what it was like, how they took everything away from them, everything they owned. So when they left Pakistan, they had nothing when they went back into India. It's a strange country, and still is. We, on several occasions, had Soviet trawlers get in the way, especially if you were on an exercise with other ships. So these trawlers would always come through sometimes they'd come right through the makeup of all of the ships. And they really didn't do anything. I've seen some of the other stories where, I remember one of the members of our organization was aboard when a trawler went on by, and they were fairly close, and a whole bunch of them got on the deck and mooned the trawler. They did the same thing to a Russian cruiser one time. How it went over or not, I don't know. I don't think the captain liked it too much, but it happens. Naples itself, you had a lot to do. A lot of really good food on the side street restaurants. You had to be careful of the kids who were trying to pick your pockets all the time. That was the only downfall. We were not there during election time, which was a good thing. I know some ships that were there during election time and they were warned to stay away from parades. There could be problems. There was right off of where the ship docked, there was a place called the Bluebird Club, which was run by the Navy. They had a restaurant and a nightclub there. And next to that was a real Italian pizzeria, which had really good pizza. The Bluebird Club restaurant, food was pretty good there. There was a lot to see, especially if you wanted to get out of town. You could get up to the factory that made the jewelry, I forget what it's called offhand, but they make this kind of jewelry out of shells. I bought some for my mother, as a matter of fact, and my sister has it now. Got out to got to Pompeii. That was really interesting, touring those ruins and stuff. And we got out to the Isle of Capri one day. We went out by hydrofoil. It takes about 30 minutes. We came back by steamboat, which takes about an hour plus. But that was fun. Get to tour around there. We didn't go swimming out there, but there was a lot of good swimming. And again, restaurants. Real Italian restaurants with real Italian food. We find the ones that were not meant for the tourists. That's the real trick. I love real Italian food. My grandparents made real Italian food. I really liked Naples. A lot of people did. There was a place in Naples, well away from where the Bluebird Club was, called the International Seamen's Club. And we loved getting out to that because there was a guitarist there who played a combination of classical and modern guitar. The guy was phenomenal. The next time I was back in Naples, he was gone. He had been there a long time, and then he had left. But I like that kind of thing. Get, and see the sights. We were in Naples probably 8 times during that period. In Italy, we hit other places like Genoa and Livorno and places like that. We didn't do any of the west coast or east coast of Italy. It was all west coast. We did do Sicily in the Augusta Bay area. I have relatives from Catania, which is below Augusta, but I didn't have any addresses to go see anybody until after we left. A lot of fun, but I do have a lot of relatives in Sicily today. They're from Bronte, which is in the Mount Etna area. So we could see that at nighttime while we were there. We didn't hit Spain. Was the one place we did not really hit, other than the refueling place, where I guess all the ships coming through and go there. We started our journey back. We were there from March, April, May, June, July, August. So we started back in September, reporting back. I went aboard as a third-class petty officer. They were expecting a seaman, striker. I had made third class aboard the McGowan in May of 1960. So but they didn't know that. For some reason, it wasn't in the paperwork. So I went aboard a third class, and they wanted to know where I'd been. And of course, I mentioned I just got back from bed to McGowan and all, and then we were going back. My starting duty for underway, I started out on the fathometer. At the time, we had a first class. We had 2 second class. One was getting out almost 3 weeks later. We then later met at the Purvis organization. The other one I became good friends with. It was a second class. There were a couple of seamen, strikers, maybe 3. I think there was one other first class, or not first class, third class. Okay. And they wanted to know what my experience was technically, and I said, well, I was the lead tech. Even though I wasn't lead PO, I was a lead tech on a McGowan because no one really knew the electronics. They says, okay, I think you're probably going to do well here, because the two of the first class, or 2 of the third class, both had been through the same sonar school, actually after me, but they really weren't, it wasn't in their, they didn't know it. They could do it in a pinch. The second class knew some. He was electronically trained, but really wasn't, again, up to that. That wasn't what he was planning to do. The first class had 0. The first class probably went in around 1948. Okay? And he had made it up to first class and had tried to get chief, but they changed the rules on chief, and we had to pass the electronics. He couldn't do it. He was not fun to have around in the compartment. Always a problem. The one second class who was getting out, he left about 3 weeks after I came aboard. So that left me and the second class who knew the most on the electronics. So when anything went wrong, generally it was me, and Ron Lloyd, who was the second class, would come in on it. We became pretty good friends after that, Liberty partners and that kind of thing. Daily routine, if you're in port, or even at sea, might be cleaning, chipping and painting some. Even the petty officers had to do a little bit of it. I would do training on those who didn't have the electronics knowledge or weren't all that good at it. I would bring, when I was working on the equipment, I would bring one of them in. And I told the first class, I said, this is what I want to do. If you're going to have me being the main guy doing this stuff, I said, I want to train these guys. So he said, okay. This kind of went on. I became a pretty good operator. The ship was a development ship. We worked a lot, multiple, the radar, radio, and all, worked with various organizations. Sangamo, GE, Naval Underwater Labs. And I loved it when Naval Underwater Labs came aboard because that was for sonar. And I worked directly with these guys. I was to be their sponsor, so to speak, while they were aboard, to be right with them if they needed anything, if they needed any help. They would be tested, being put on to test, and then they would take it home. Well, one day they came aboard and they put in this new piece of sonar equipment called Aspect, which was to help define whether it was really a sub or not. And I worked directly with them in the installation and everything. And then I met them again when they came aboard for more testing. They actually wanted me to come to work for them when I got out. Problem was I had to wait 2 years to take the government exams because I still had 2 years of reserve duty, whether it was active or inactive. Mine was inactive. I was going to school. So that was really one of the great parts of my work on the Purvis. And anytime you were aboard on Sunday, one officer would have a church service. Generally, destroyers don't have a true chaplain. They'll have someone that will do something. Sometimes it's even the executive officer that does it. Right? This is whether you're at sea or in port. If we were in port and I could go on over, like if I had Friday duty, might be off Saturday and Sunday, sometimes I'd go into Newport to the Y and rent a room for $5. And then Sunday morning I'd get up and go to church. The Methodist church in Newport. And I would go there. I would also go on the services on the fantail when they were given either in port or at sea. And then again, they would be covered by some officer. Right? That's kind of what like weekend duty was like. Saturday, if you had Friday duty, you then had Saturday and Sunday. Normally, sometimes you would have Friday and Sunday. You had Saturday off. I would go into town. There was my favorite Italian restaurant was next to the Y. Was USNM, they called it. It wasn't a regular Y open to the public. It was actually really for the Navy. There you could get food. You could sit and watch TV, play pool, rent a room for the night, get a haircut. A lot of guys would go there to get their haircuts instead of the chair on board. The only time you used that was at sea and you had to have a haircut. Things like that. But that's kind of the way weekends were. Sundays, a lot of time pretty easy. It was Saturday and Sunday in port. Really wasn't a work day, unless there was a work gang working because they were in trouble, that kind of stuff. But I made second class on time, so I was second class the last year and a half that I was aboard. So now I'm the lead. There was another second class who was senior to me, and when it came time for him to take over lead PO in the compartment, there's a different story on the first class that I'll tell you about in a minute. He said, "Oh no, I don't want to do that. Give it to Sam." Went right to the division officer and said, "No, I'm not. I don't want to do that. I don't want any responsibility." So I became lead PO in the compartment. So now I'm the muster PO. The deal with the first class was no electronics. Me and another guy decided we're going to teach him. We spent months, 6 months with him, teaching him enough. We had an idea what was on the exam by talking to another chief. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're trying to teach Chief enough electronics to get him passed." He says, "Oh, good luck, but here's what he needs to know." So in that 6-month period, we taught him enough. And he took the test and he got picked the first time around. Usually unheard of, maybe because he was so long. I don't know. Got him out of the compartment, became the nicest guy in the world. That was one great thing that we did. So the last 8 months, I'd say, in my time, I was lead PO. We left Europe, or the Mediterranean, sometime around in early September of 1962. We headed on back to Newport and arrived sometime in mid to late September, and we immediately were assigned to the America's Cup races, which were in Newport that year. You become a sort of a picket ship that's used. There'll be a number of destroyers and escorts out there to form a line to keep the watchers from going over the line and getting in the way of the boats. And that's kind of easy duty. You go out with port and starboard liberty. Only half the crew is aboard when they do it, so you get some time off during that, and that was pretty good. At the end of September, we're back to our normal everyday life in Newport and doing some dailies and stuff like that. We were out on a daily, and we came back in, and I was in the Y in October of '62 when John F. Kennedy gave his talk about Cuba. And we watched that all the way through, and then Shore Patrol came in and said, "All sailors, please return to your ships immediately," which is what we did. Everybody got on the buses heading back to port, back to the base, report back aboard ship. And we notified that we were getting underway early the next morning. We weren't going immediately to the picket line. We were going down, and we were at that time testing the Dash helicopters, the drone helicopter system. So we were on the eastern seaboard, down around the Carolinas. Our division officer told us the way they were notified is to tell your guys that we're going out and we're not sure when we're getting back. He said, when they presented it to the officer, supposedly it was, "We're going out and we're not sure if we're coming back," which was a really scary situation. That was something my division officer told me years later, which we had become friends afterwards. And sometime around the 15th or 16th, we ended up on the picket line. The real problem was that when we were on the picket line for the Cuban Missile Crisis, there you had to be much more careful. You'd have ships, large ships, that were maybe carrying missiles, we don't know. Many of those missiles were carried openly on ships, because it's hard to hide them. But, and I saw many pictures of the ones as they were leaving, taking the missiles away. But they can't turn very quick, so sometimes you'd have to get out of their way a little bit. But it was let known, the ships on the picket line let them know that we're here, and you better not cross us. And to my knowledge, they really didn't have a lot of trouble with that. A lot of ships just did what they were told and turned around and went the other way. We were only on, like I said, only on there a couple of days, and then we were called into Guantanamo. 3 ships were in Guantanamo, 1 at the piers, 1 in the bay, and 1 outside the bay. And you would rotate those 3 positions. And while in those positions, like especially if you were on the pier, if you stood a watch, it was with a loaded carbine and a loaded .45. Only time the guns were ever loaded when you stood quarterdeck or bow watches. As a bow or a fantail or a bridge watch, you had a carbine. A quarterdeck, of course, you had a .45. And the only time that they were actually loaded my whole time. It was a bit scary because every day GQ would go off. Cuban MiGs would be heading in towards Guantanamo base, but they would always turn around and go the other way. Okay, so, and then we would rotate. We would do a time in the bay and a time outside. But we also had some special sonar equipment aboard that could give us a better definition of what a contact looked like. We were called out multiple times to look at these things. One funny one was a ship had a contact on something that seemed to be giving movement, Doppler effects, stuff like that. So we were called out to classify that, and we had a Commodore aboard. And he was all sure that this was going to be a Russian submarine. And we got out, we ran this piece of equipment over it that uses the sonar sounding and prints it out on a piece of paper. And it showed up to be a 1,000-foot deep pinnacle with strong currents running around it that caused the Doppler effect. And when we told him it was a pinnacle, he was very disappointed. So back into base, and then a few days later we get called out. We did have one contact we classified as a submarine, which turned out to be Russian. We gave it over to 2 escorts who escorted him away from the area. He finally surfaced. That's how we found out it was Russian, because it was not a nuclear sub. So he surfaced. Then towards the end of the crisis, even after everything was settled, we were still down there well into November, to the point where we were playing ball games that the ball fields were up against the fences that led to the no man's land that led to the Cuban fences. And we'd be playing softball there, and we were getting cheers from the Cuban guards when somebody would make a great catch in the outfield. Then it became a lot of fun. Most of the other officers I have trouble remembering. The one I remember upper would be my chief. It was Chief Betts, an old soul. I met him years later at a picnic over in Columbus, New Jersey, that a guy that's a radioman that I know aboard was having. And he looked at me and then he looked, "You're Sam, aren't you?" "I remember you." When I met him, he must have been, at that point, probably 75, 80 years old. But he was a good guy. Stayed out of your way. The chief stayed out of your way. On board the Purvis, there were a number of officers I remembered. Of course, the captain's name I don't remember offhand. We had the executive officer, what's his name, Fletcher? He had called me in to see him for my shipping overtalk. And he said, "Sam, have a seat." "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, how are you doing?" I said, "Fine, sir. How are you?" And he says, "Is there anything I can do to talk you into shipping over?" I said, "No, sir." He says, "Is there a why?" And I said, "Well," there's a lot that I like, an awful lot that I like, and an awful lot has been done for me. I said, but I look at a lot of the lifers, and I don't see what I see is a lot of what I don't like. I said, the way they are when they're away from home. You have lifers who going over, and next thing you know, they're on board ship. They're not allowed to go aboard on sea because there's got VD. And these are guys that are married. And then they take that home to their wives. And I just saw too much of that on board, and particularly the Purvis. Some on the McGowan, more on the Purvis because I was there longer. You know, I had over 2 years on the Purvis. Due to the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone due to get out in the next year were automatically extended indefinitely. Once we were released from Cuba on the way back, they said anyone who wishes to rescind their extension, because it wasn't automatic, it wasn't taken away automatically, you had to report to the ship's office. Well, I thought I was going to get there pretty quick. I was about 45th in line. But I decided I wasn't staying in. I thought about it, but I decided I wasn't. And we headed on back to Newport. We're talking about Christmas time. I did get home for Christmas leave, and then back to Newport over New Year's. I went home for Christmas, and then I was aboard New Year's Day and New Year's Eve. And we were in port, big celebration. Everybody had lights up and that, and fireworks going. I don't remember what day that was of the week, but we did have a Sunday routine that day. So then there was a big Sunday brunch with steak and eggs. It was really, really nice. And we were doing some daily stuff in and out of Newport for the next. We were starting to go back out on dash testing again. And that's what we were doing in late January. And we're heading into early February. I was due to get out on the 4th. That was a Sunday. I was notified I was getting out on the 2nd, which was Friday, because they don't want to keep you. We were in the Chesapeake Bay when they pulled up into a naval base there, a naval air station. Put the motor whaleboat in and dumped me on the pier, along with a suitcase and my sea bag. And goodbye, time to go. And I had to catch a bus into DC and a bus on home to Philadelphia. And that was my time in the Navy through the Hugh Purvis. There are times I thought about going back in after I got out because I wasn't finding any work. 1963 was a hard time. Getting out the 2nd of February, and then I started looking immediately. I wanted to stay eastern seaboard from Delaware on up to New York. I was finding nothing. Kid next door said, go back to school. I said, I'm not sure I'm qualified. He says, go to Temple Community College, Temple University's Technical School and Community College. He said, it's a 3-year program. You got to get through the first 2 years first. So I looked into it. So I took some exams, and they said, you need some remedial math. You need algebra, trig, and geometry. I didn't have enough of it. My high school graduation was pre-industrial. So I had industrial math, some algebra, some trig, some geometry, not near enough. So I took 6 weeks of algebra, trig, and geometry at Temple University's Technical High School. 8 hours a day, or 7 hours a day, 65 days a week, because I was working a 40-hour week. He got me a job in a pizzeria, which I ended up managing one before I finally quit. But I went through and did enough to get accepted into Temple Tech. So I went on through that number of electronics courses, which were easy. The math was the hardest. Physics was hard, not as hard. And got through the Technical Institute, graduated, and went on to the community college. This was a 1-year program where you're going to learn how to do research type stuff. A little bit harder. you got some more math, you got some more advanced math, calculus, more calculus, differential equations and all that kind of stuff. And you went through, and on these special course where you were doing some research, you had to pick a topic, any topic you wanted, and do something to research what you were thinking about. And me and another guy came up with this idea, and we decided to try it. And we went on, and we actually demonstrated a working model of something and got through. So I graduated from Temple's Community College, and while there, companies came in from IBM and DuPont and a number of others. And I interviewed IBM, DuPont, and Bell Labs. I had an offer before the end of the day from Bell Labs and DuPont. Now, DuPont would have been down in Delaware. IBM came in with an offer. They said, you're going to have an offer from IBM, and that's going to be in Endicott, New York. Bell Labs is going to be in Murray Hill, New Jersey, New Providence. And I interviewed 3 organizations at Bell Labs. Actually, at that point, they said, we want you to come in. So I went down to Delaware, I went to Endicott, I went to Bell Labs. And at Bell Labs, I went to Murray Hill and interviewed 2 groups up there, and they took me down to Holmdel, interviewed 1 group there. One was in laser technology, one was in the touch-tone telephones that you see today, and the other one was in research. And they said, what would be your choice? I said, the research one. He said, why? I said, that was really the most interesting. I said, that just seems like something I could help people with. I said, I'm only going to have a technical degree, I'm going to be a TA. He says, well, you have an offer in all 3, but the best offer was the one in research. I said, good, I'll take it. And I turned down the other 2. Turned down those 2, took the one in research in Murray Hill. We ended up moving down to Holmdel very quickly. And I spent 35 years there, working with PhDs. Great. A guy by the name of Dennis Dow, who lives down in the Tampa Bay area, him and another started the Purvis organization, Hugh Purvis Reunion Association, in 1991. And it's been ongoing since then. I joined the organization in 2006 when the reunion was in Philadelphia, but I, for some reason, didn't go. And I only lived 45 minutes from there. In 2008, I did decide to go, and my first reunion was in Boston, which was really nice. I met a number of people that I knew already, including my division officer was there, who we've become good friends since then. I met a member who was running the organization then, who had taken over in 2006, had changed and made true bylaws for the organization because there were problems before. And we've been a pretty good group ongoing all the way to now. I've been president of the Purvis Association sort of by default when nobody else wanted it since New Orleans in 2016. I'm about ready to relinquish that role. I've had enough time. Someone else needs to do it. We don't know what's going to happen because it's hard to get people to do this kind of work. We've had a really good group of officers who formed the board of directors over the years. They've all done great work. I've had good help from the guy who started the organization. We hadn't heard from him in a long time after the changeover in the way it was run. But he finally was able to talk to me and get me data that he had that no one else had. It's been an ongoing group. We had reunions every year except for the 2 years of COVID. We have been to Annapolis before, but really we were in Baltimore and we're only there for a day. We've always wanted to have one in Annapolis where we're going to be really visiting the base, the academy. We have had a number of officers aboard both the McGowan and the Purvis who were graduates of the place. And in our reunion in Annapolis in 2024, we had one member, one officer who was a graduate there. So he was great for the tour guide, who could really help point out things even better. But even better, the ship is named after Private, or then Corporal Hugh Purvis, U.S. Marine Corps, and the first Korean problem in 1871, I do believe. His family exists in the Baltimore area. There is a Terry Purvis, who's the matriarch of the family at this point, and his wife. He has a son called Hugh Purvis, who has a son who's 10 years old called Hugh Purvis. They all, whole family, came to our reunion last year and met us at Annapolis and helped us with the tour. And our memorial service is usually held at some specific point for a memorial. It was held at the gravesite of Corporal Hugh Purvis at the cemetery outside of Annapolis. The whole family came and participated in that ceremony. And we had a really nice time. We had time going around Annapolis itself, the base, or the academy with them, had lunch with them, and then for our final thing for any reunion is a dinner, formal dinner. And Terry Purvis and his wife attended that thing. He gave a talk on the whole situation of the Purvis family and how they've all stayed together and how much it means to them, and how they decided to turn over the Medal of Honor to the Academy. So it's displayed at the museum in the Naval Academy for anybody to see. And they had it on special view for us for that thing. It was really nice, and Terry announced at the dinner that he will be attending the Newport reunion. Hugh Purvis was a Marine. Before that, he was in the Army, and he was in the Army at the end of the Civil War, if I'm not mistaken. He decided to join the Marine Corps, and there was a problem in Korea of which the U.S. was involved. So we call it the First Korean Conflict of 1871. There were several ships there, of which he was aboard one of them, as a contingent of Marines, and they were attacking a base, so to speak, on the Korean mainland. And I don't remember the town, the area, but the area today is in North Korea on the shoreline. When they attacked and were able to get into where the Korean flag was, he was responsible, along with a lieutenant and another Marine Corps guy, of pulling the Korean flag down and raising the American flag. And in that process, many were injured. The lieutenant, I do believe, was injured. He was not injured. And for that, they were awarded the Medal of Honor.